Hello, everybody. Welcome to another video. This is our third video for the month of May, and I hope the other two have been useful for you. I really appreciate the number of people who have watched, as well as the feedback that we've gotten from them. It's been very helpful, and I'm glad that y'all appreciate this format. That this is a little bit easier than Zoom or making it to a Zoom call, and so I'm glad that this has been beneficial for you. If you have not watched the other two videos so far, feel free to go back there on our website. And so you can find those, watch them, take the quiz, get your CEU certificate, and yeah, it's pretty easy, pretty simple. So today we're going to get into a book today that's called, I don't know if this is going to pick up or not because of my little blurry background thing. But it's called Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. And it's through the work of John Gottman. John Gottman is especially known for his work with marriages, romantic relationships, but he's got quite a wealth of work that he's also put into regarding raising children. So John Gottman is kind of the go-to when it comes to marriage and relationship type things. He identified the four horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to relationships, especially marriages, and what signals the deterioration of our relationships. So he's a big time relationship guy, has a lot of really good work out there. So if you Google John Gottman and find any kind of books about him or from him, or any of his work, you're going to be really encouraged and strengthened by reading it because he has spent a great deal of time figuring this stuff out. So today I want to go through what he describes as an effective way to raise an emotionally intelligent child. And I will say as a caveat that if you have watched the other two videos, there's going to be a lot of overlap between those because we've talked about resilience, which is essentially what this book is about, emotional resilience. We've had a video on resilience. We've had a video on conflict between parents and their tweens and teens. And there's a lot of stuff about that in this book as well. So I'll try to just give like the pertinent, non-repetitive information so that we can get into some good meaty stuff here without being too terribly repetitive. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen. And as always, whenever we're done with this, you'll see the link for the quiz, and you'll go to our website and take the quiz, and then we'll send you, you'll automatically get a link for an evaluation, and then once we get your evaluation back, we'll send over your CEU. So it'll be the same way as always. So here we go, raising emotionally intelligent children, based off the work by John Gottman and his book, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. So let's get into emotional intelligence. What is it? Sometimes emotional intelligence is abbreviated as EQ instead of EI, but EQ actually comes from another writer named Daniel Goleman, who has a whole lot of really good stuff about emotional intelligence. And so his work is really worth looking into as well. But emotional intelligence is sometimes called EQ for like emotional quotient, the way we talk about intelligence quotient, like IQ, but it's EQ instead of intelligence. Anyway, that's why. But what is it? It's being aware that emotions can drive our behavior and impact people, and learning how to manage those emotions, both our own and others. So high emotional intelligence, a high EQ, means I know how I'm feeling. I can pretty accurately read how you're feeling, and I can find productive ways to deal with both of those so that we don't burn the house down every time either one of us feels bad. Name it to tame it is probably a phrase that you've heard in the foster care and adoption world a lot. It's part of TBRI work from Karen Purvis and the work coming out of TCU. But I don't know if she coined that term or not. I know that's where I first heard it was from Karen Purvis. Name it to tame it. So what that means is if you name the emotion you're feeling, you have a much better chance of being able to successfully manage it. So the ability to name the emotion we're feeling gives us power over it by activating logical processes. If I'm going to label something, give something a title or a term, then I'm activating the logical part of my brain, which we'll get into here in just a minute, instead of the emotional part of my brain. So I'm actually moving the activity of the brain out of that emotional state. And so that can be really, really helpful. So why emotional intelligence matters? It helps us stay with the emotions we feel and better understand other people's emotions. Sometimes when we're feeling bad, and as parents, let's face it, sometimes we just feel bad. And whenever we're supposed to be the emotionally mature people in the house, sometimes we're just not. When we're supposed to be in a good headspace, sometimes we're just not. When we want to honor the worldview and the values that we hold, sometimes we just don't. We lose it. We have a bad day. But whenever we're able to recognize it, when we're able to identify what's going on, it's much easier for us to stay with that emotion without resisting it and without feeling like I'm not supposed to feel this way, because then all that does is just keep the negative cycle going more and more and more. So if I can just identify the emotion that I'm in, then it helps me to manage it so much better. Okay. I really liked this quote just in terms of overall parenting and raising kids and why raising an emotionally intelligent child matters. John Gottman said, "In my research, I discovered that love by itself wasn't enough. Very concerned, warm, and involved parents often had attitudes toward their own and their children's emotions that got in the way of them being able to talk to their children when they were sad or afraid or angry. But while love by itself was not enough, channeling that caring into some basic skills that parents practiced as if they were coaching their children in the area of emotion was enough. The secret lay in how parents interacted with their children when emotions ran hot. And that's the hard part. This isn't about necessarily just coaching when everything's hunky dory and everything's good. While I will say that's very important, I think you have to be able to circle back after emotions dissipate and you're able to sit down with your kids and talk to them whenever the emotions aren't running high. That's very important. But emotion coaching is also for in the moment, the heat of the moment. What are we going to do with these big emotions that we feel? And you can see why this would especially be necessary and helpful for kiddos who have a traumatic background, for kiddos who come from trauma, or kiddos who are just experiencing hard, frustrating times because they have been displaced through foster care. And they have a hard time understanding and expressing and managing their own emotions. You can understand why this would be extremely important in the world of foster care. Okay, there are a handful of common parenting styles that he labels, that he's like, these are all kind of the ones that we do. We want to try our best to get out of these. And I will also say that of these 3 common parenting styles, it's not that like you do this one exclusively, like this is you, like this is your identity. We move in and out of these throughout the day, sometimes even in the same conversation with one of our kids. We can be all 3 of these at various times. So it's important to recognize when we're being this way and to try to slide out of these not so helpful parenting styles. So one is the dismissing parent, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm not in the mood for this. I don't have time for this. I understand that you're upset, but I need you to take that somewhere else. Go tell somebody else about it. Go sit with it by yourself. Go do something, but don't bring it to me anymore. The dismissing parent can also just be like, what's the big deal? Why are you upset about that? If that was me, I wouldn't feel that way. And so just being very dismissive, not necessarily about what's happening, but about how the child is feeling in the moment. And that will be a very common theme throughout this as well, that it's not so much about the surface level of what's happening. This is about emotion. We talked about this in our conflict video, that there are 3 conversations that happen. There's the what's happening, there's the emotions, and then there's the identity. And this is especially honing in on that emotion element, that probably the biggest part of emotional coaching, which is what this whole book is about being able to tap into that emotional element with our kiddos. So being dismissive basically says your emotions don't matter to me. Whether we agree with them or not, we're sending that signal, your emotions don't matter. The disapproving parent, very similar, and again, exactly what it sounds like. You are wrong for having that emotion. I disapprove of that. This thing happened and your response is not correct. And so we send signals to our kiddos that not only are we dismissing them, but we're also telling them that how they're feeling is wrong. when in fact how they're feeling is just how they're feeling. Now, it might be an overreaction. It very well might be. It might not be appropriate to what happened. It might be that our kid is tired and their reaction is just from their lack of sleep. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe it's all sorts of things. But what we're telling them is what you're feeling is wrong, and you're wrong for feeling it. And what that leads to is an inability to trust my own emotions. So as I grow up, I start thinking, uh-oh, I'm having that feeling that my dad always said was wrong. Or, uh-oh, I'm having that feeling my mom always told me I'm not supposed to have. And I shouldn't be having that emotion. And then kids get all tangled up and they don't know how to just sit with that emotion because they're wrong for having it. So we really want to avoid being a disapproving parent when it comes to our kids' emotions. We want to avoid being dismissive. We want to avoid being disapproving. And we want to avoid being the laissez-faire parent. This one, on the surface, as he was kind of describing in the book, I was like, this kind of sounds pretty good, actually, because the laissez-faire parent starts out empathetically. It starts out going, man, I can tell that you're mad. Oh my goodness, I can tell that you're really upset about this. You look really frustrated right now. I can tell, I can just see it on your face that there's a lot of frustration in you. But then it just sort of falls off the cliff. So the laissez-faire parent, I can identify your emotion. I can tell you what it looks like you're feeling, but I'm not going to do anything to affirm it. I'm not going to do anything to acknowledge that there's some kind of value in it, or even that that I recognize the detrimental effect that it's having on you. I'm just going to sort of say it like, oh yeah, I can tell that you're feeling bad, but I'm not going to come and help you out of this thing. Um, and now, don't get that confused with uh, what we'll get into later, where we'll talk about helping a child problem solve and why it's really important to help a child get there on their own. This is different from that. This is just, I see how you're feeling, and I'm not going to give any kind of signal that I actually care. So we don't want to be any one of these three parents. We don't want to be the dismissive parent. We don't want to be the disapproving parent. And we don't want to be the laissez-faire parent. Now, if you are one of these three parents or all three of these parenting types from time to time, cut yourself a little slack. We all are because we are all human. The important part is not so much that you can never do this. If you watch this video, you should never do this again. You're going to do it. You're going to be dismissive. You're going to be disapproving. You're going to be laissez-faire about things. The important thing is to recognize when we are and try to cycle out of that and into what John Gottman says is ideal, which is being our child's emotional coach. When we are our child's emotional coach, we're not being dismissive of their emotions, we're not being disapproving of their emotions, and we're not being laissez-faire or sending any kind of signals that we don't care about how they're feeling. Instead, as an emotional coach, we're helping to guide them from distress into comfort. And recognize that says guiding and not forcing, not dragging, not hacking away at the path, clearing the path for them. We're going to be a guide. We're going to act as a guide to show them how they can get themselves into a state of comfort, into a state of emotional regulation. For our part as parents, this requires a great deal of selflessness because, my goodness, we're all exhausted. Everybody is. We're all tired. We all have so much going on our plates. Everybody is working. Everybody is raising kiddos. Most of us in the foster care world have at least 2 or more kids in the home, according to state statistics. And so if one child requires a whole lot of our attention, sometimes it's hard to continue giving that to them when we have other things we need to get to. But it requires a level of selflessness. You have my attention when you're in front of me. And we must show genuine respect, which again can be a difficult one, especially if we just don't feel it. Because let's just be honest again, sometimes as foster parents, we spend enough time with our kiddos and we get burned by them enough. We get enough hatred spewed at us from them. We get all of their anger and emotional dysregulation lobbed right at us. Moms especially seem to get this, that sometimes it can be hard to show genuine respect, but we'll get into why this matters here in a bit. But if we're not able to show genuine respect, then we're going to have a really hard time doing any of this emotional coaching. And then finally, we need to make sure that we understand what our kiddos are experiencing and then offer some advice if advice is appropriate. Not not understand what they're saying, not understand what the situation is, but understand the emotions and the feelings underneath it. We have to understand that first and then advise. And this is a common thing, again, in the TBRI world, where it's connection before correction, I believe is the phrase that's used, something like that. You need to connect emotionally with your child before you offer any corrective behavior or any corrective advice. And I think John Gottman would be on board with that idea. All right. So another reason that this is extremely difficult. This is not in the book. This actually came out. The book was written a long time ago. This was like pre-internet or pre-home internet. So it's kind of funny whenever you read through this, and he's like, parents these days are so busy, and children have over 30 television channels to choose from. I'm like, wow, that does sound busy. Anyway, there's a lot of comments like that where you're like, this book is old, but it's still really, really good. A book that came out just a couple of years ago, The Atlas of the Heart, I think is what it's called. I should have looked that up or like had a slide for that, but I think it's called The Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. How many emotions are there? They discovered 87 unique human emotions, which is crazy. 87 unique human emotions. And emotions obviously shape our lives. They help us foster authenticity and connection with one another. And so we need to understand them. We need to be able to manage them well. And that's another part of what makes emotional intelligence difficult, because emotions and intelligence don't always operate in concert. And so we'll get into this. A strong PFC is required. Understanding what the emotions are is difficult work. And so to be able to do this effectively, we need to at least be able to manage, navigate, and be able to identify what the emotions are. We might not be able to identify all 87, especially in real time whenever they're happening. But I share this information just to say this requires some intentional attention on emotions and on understanding not just our own, but also the emotions that our kiddos experience. So because they don't operate in concert, a strong prefrontal cortex is required. PFC stands for prefrontal cortex. So you might have heard a whole bunch of stuff about the brain through some of our classes. I know if you're a Katie Walker fan, she talks about the brain quite a bit in our classes. I've talked about the brain a lot, especially as it relates to things like mindfulness. And so it's really important that we understand that our brain is divided into these sections, even though it still sort of works intermingly. I don't know what the word is. It intermingles with each other, even though it does have these sectioned off elements. Okay. But the emotional part of our brain is especially driven by the hippocampus and the amygdala. The hippocampus, especially, is where our memory bank is stored. The amygdala is kind of the alarm system of the brain, telling us something is wrong. When this part of the brain, when the emotional limbic region of our brain is active, it shuts down a lot of our prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is where most of our logical and linear thinking occurs. So the reason that this is important, stay with me here for just a second. The reason that this is important is because if your child is emotionally dysregulated, okay, you can envision a scenario where you walk into the room because you hear screaming or you hear fighting or you hear something, and your child is clearly just emotionally distressed. All right, they are in this part of the brain here. They're in their limbic region. They're in the hippocampus. The amygdala is just firing, and it's signaling all the stress, all the cortisol, all the hormones to go for the fight, flight, or freeze. They're just ready for something. They're feeling everything. Now you walk into this feeling nothing, but you're over here in your prefrontal cortex, and you're just thinking. So you're thinking about what happened while they're not thinking at all. They're just feeling with that emotional part of the brain. And so our job then is not to convince them that they are being irrational, because they're not. They're not being rational at all. They're feeling. Feeling and logic are two different things in two different parts of the brain. And so our job is not to convince them of how irrational they're being. Our job is to help guide them from this part of the brain back up here to this part of the brain. And that's what we're going to get into today. How do we make that journey to help with emotional regulation? Because we have parts of the prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex specifically, is sort of like a watchtower that can turn around and look at the emotions that we're feeling. But in order to do that, to analyze our own emotional state, we have to be in a logical state of mind. So it's our job as parents to help get our kids there. Now, I'll say a caveat with that. Whenever I say it's our job as parents, that doesn't mean that we are always capable of doing it. So if you're like, well, I try all these things, but my kiddo it just doesn't work, that doesn't mean that you're failing. It could mean that they need more help than you're able to give them. But this ought to be our goal, is to help, is to recognize that that I see that you're in an emotional part of your brain, kind of in my logical brain right now. So I can either help you, or we need to just hit the pause button and we can talk about this when we're both ready to be logical. But it does no good to try to talk to a kiddo in their emotional brain when you're in your logical brain. Okay. I think I have beaten that horse completely to death. I think we all understand now. Here we go. Okay, the 5 key steps of emotional coaching. This is sort of the heart of the book by John Gottman. Number 1 is awareness. Be aware of and label your child's emotions, but not just your child's. You have to be aware of and label your emotions too. How good are you at that? Like if you had to take an emotional intelligence quiz, which they are out there online actually, how good would you do? And in fact, they're kind of interesting because there are sections for how good you are at analyzing your own emotions, how good you are at analyzing other emotions, and how good you are at navigating emotional interactions between people. And so awareness is where it all starts. Like, can you label your own state of mind right now? If you had to hit the pause button right now and identify the emotion that you're feeling now, what emotion would you say? How good are you at that level of awareness? And John Gottman really gets into, especially in this section of the book, he gets into a big, I don't know, the word rant is in my mind. It's not a rant. It's actually just really solid teaching about how this, almost more than anything else, is essential for parents to be just as good at this as you want your kids to be. And so some tips for emotional awareness for yourself that he offers in the book: meditation, prayer, journaling, and artistic expression. There's a lot of science out there right now about things like meditation, things like centering prayer, types of prayer that focus inward, especially. If we're able to sit just in silence and reflect inwardly at our own state, what's my mind doing? What are my thoughts doing? Man, that leads to a lot of emotional growth. Journaling is a great practice as well. There's free journaling, or free writing, I think it's called, where you basically get a prompt, and for 10 minutes you just have to write. You can't stop writing. You can't go back and edit. You just write. And eventually stuff just starts coming out that you didn't really know was in there. And it's a really healthy practice. And then artistic expression. It doesn't necessarily have to be painting, but any sort of artistic expression. That's a great way of just being present with what's inside and trying to get it outside. And so if you struggle with emotional awareness, or if you feel like your emotions are something that you're afraid of, and you tend to avoid allowing your emotions to come to the surface, maybe it's a good idea to start practicing some of these things so that you can start managing and learning your own emotions as well. Another quote from the book: keep in mind that building greater emotional awareness requires a bit of solitude, something that's often in short supply for today's busy parents. If you remind yourself, however, that time spent alone can help you to become a better parent, it doesn't seem so indulgent. So time spent alone, and this isn't like time spent alone, like I'm going to go check out and binge watch Netflix for 9 hours. I mean, time spent alone with intentional solitude for the purpose of emotional awareness and emotional regulation. That's really, really a gift that you give to your family and to your children. And so if that's not something that you work into your daily routine, I really strongly encourage you to find some ways to do that, and in ways that are beneficial to you. Everybody's different, so find the ways that work for you. And if you are interested in understanding or knowing more about this, feel free to reach out to us. We spend a pretty good deal of time talking about things like this, so don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you with this. So awareness was the first step. Second step is connection. I mentioned this earlier. connect before you correct, that sort of thing. But he especially talks about in the book that this is an opportunity for intimacy and teaching with small things. And the reason that this is important is because if we can learn to connect with our kiddos on an emotional level during small moments, say like the 4-year-old is sitting down to eat and accidentally spills their food everywhere and now they're sad. Let's connect on an emotional level. Oh man, you worked hard on fixing your own lunch today. I was really proud of you. I bet you that feels really bad. Here, I'm going to help you clean it up, and then let's figure out what we're going to do next together. Acknowledging the emotion that they're feeling in the moment with small things can really open the door to them trusting us with big things. And a lot of times those big things come later down the road during like the pre-adolescence and adolescent stages, which we'll get into here in just a bit. But the more we learn to connect, it's not only that they learn to trust us, it's that we learn to understand them better. We can kind of test the waters with small things. Oh, buddy, I'm sorry. You look sad right now. Are you feeling sad? Oh, okay. You look like you were feeling sad. How are you feeling right now? Connection and demonstrating that we care about their emotional state in small things goes a long, long way. And so always take advantage of those opportunities for intimacy and for teaching. Empathy, he says at the start of the book that empathy is the foundation for all of this, that you really can't do anything if you don't have empathy for your child. And this one can be a hard one, especially, again, not just because we're always busy, but sometimes we don't want to have empathy. We just want our kids to see the world our way instead of really pausing to understand what the world looks like from their perspective. And so empathy involves listening actively and validating the child's feelings. If you are like me and you grew up in a very authoritarian home where it was hierarchical, the parents are in charge, the kids are subservient and just do what they're told, this can start to feel like some woo-woo type language, like validate the child's feelings. Why would I ever do something like that? Now, validating feelings is not about saying that their feelings are right or appropriate. But their feelings are their feelings. It's recognizing reality. Whether you want to validate or not really is irrelevant. Are you willing to acknowledge how they are feeling right now, regardless of what you think about that? And when we can sort of drop that resistance on our end, if that's something that you struggle with, when we can sort of drop that resistance and we can just go, how is my child feeling right now? Man, that opens us up to seeing the situation through their perspective. And until we're able to do that, we really don't have anything to say to them because all they're going to hear is, my feelings don't matter to you. And they might go through the motions of what you're telling them to do. They might follow your orders. They might obey. But at the end of the day, they're still feeling this sense of disconnect from you. And so empathy is really critical to this, and having to intentionally look at this perspective or look at this situation through the lens and through the perspective of my child and what they're experiencing. It is profound, but it is also critical for doing this successfully. Okay. Once we have some awareness, once we've established some connection, once we have engaged in a little bit of empathy to understand from their perspective, now we're ready to offer a little bit of guidance. And this isn't, okay, go do this, go do this, go do this. This is not ordering. This is not bossing the kid around. This is not making demands. This is offering some guidance. Okay, I think that if you really want to get out of this situation, if you don't want to feel this way anymore, or if you want to make this situation better, here are a few things you might consider. But it starts with helping the child verbally label their own emotions. How are you feeling right now? What would you say is going through your head? What does it feel like whenever this happens to you? I've noticed that you get upset about this a lot. What's going through your mind whenever this takes place? Because again, it's important for us to be able to name it, to tame it, but it's really important to hand that skill off to our kids as well. that they can learn how to name their emotions so that they can tame them. And we can provide some guidance with that. It looks like what you're feeling right now is this. Is that true? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And that can go a really long way. The $1,000,000 question, before we get to the fifth step, the $1,000,000 question behind all of this, and what I think you could summarize this entire book with this one question: how do you think we should respond to this? The more we can throw that question to our child, and I mean throw it like, this isn't your job now, but the more we can hand this question off to our child, how do you think we should respond to this? The more we're helping them establish their own trust and confidence in themselves and in their problem-solving abilities. This is building resilience. This is building a sense of emotional stability so that they can trust themselves. They can trust their intuition and they can trust their own problem-solving skills. So how do you think we should respond to this? And then really listen to them. Now, if you're asking this in the heat of the moment and they're upset, mostly you're just going to hear, I don't know, or tell them to give it back, or let me have my turn, or something like that. It's just going to be their fear response still kicking in. But if we can go through those steps and really have some awareness, establish a connection, have some empathy, offer a little bit of guidance, then I think we can reach a place, for the most part, this isn't always going to be true, but for the most part, we can reach a place where they're really willing to think about this question. How do you think we should respond to this? And this language is intentional. Asking, how do you think? I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm sincerely curious to hear what you think about this. And how do you think we should respond? We, you and I. I'm not putting this on you. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you. And how do you think we should respond? Respond is different than react. Respond is calculated. Respond is logical. Respond comes from the prefrontal cortex. How do you think we should respond to this? Now, obviously, some kiddos are going to be a little bit more mature and a little bit more developed to be able to answer this question. But the earlier we start asking our kids this question, I think the earlier we start helping them build up some emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. Okay, so the last step is problem solving. Set limits and guide them towards action. So if there's a problem, if there's a conflict over a toy, this morning we had a whole fight between our 10 and 11-year-old. That we let them watch a little bit of television this morning, and lo and behold, they couldn't do that without fighting over whose turn it is. And this happens every time they watch TV, and almost every time I get mad. I'll get more into this here in a minute, but there's a problem. Somebody thinks it's their turn, somebody else thinks it's their turn, and so now there's a dispute. What do we do here? Well, we need to set some limits. Number one, you're not allowed to yell. You can't go off. Number two, you can't go hide the remote somewhere. Like, we're not going to do that stuff, guys. Like, we're going to set some limits and some boundaries. All right. And now that we've got our limits and boundaries set, we're going to guide you towards some action. Let's talk about what we need to be doing here. Let's have some awareness. Let's connect with each other. Let's have some empathy. Let's talk about what we're actually feeling. And then let's reach a reasonable solution. One of the things that we did when our kids were younger, though, much younger, like toddler age, we had this red bath mat. And we put the red mat like just over against a wall somewhere in like our living room. And when our toddlers would throw a fit, we would tell them, like, when they're, like tantrum mode, like jumping, stomping, pounding the fist, screaming, crying, like full out tantrum mode, we would tell them, hey, you can have your tantrum, like, be upset, but remember, you have to have your tantrum on the red mat, or you have to have your fit on the red mat. So go throw your fit over on the red mat. And then they would walk over to the red mat and they would stand there. And we would watch them. And they would be like, what am I supposed to do? Because when you're allowed to throw a fit, but only in this squared rectangular space, and everyone is watching you, like, it just really sucks the fun out of it. And it took the emotion right out of it, because now they're having to think about throwing a fit. They have to think about, okay, do I really want to jump up and down and stomp my feet? That doesn't feel productive now. And so what we're doing is we're giving them a boundary. Okay, we're going to help you problem solve. We're going to help you get out of your fit, but you have to do it right here in this literal physical boundary. And sometimes for younger kids, that can help a lot. For older kids, we have to give a lot of emotional boundaries, a lot of physical, like you can't slam your door. You can be mad at me, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you not to be mad at me, but in your anger, you're not allowed to go yell at your siblings. So we're going to offer some boundaries and then offer some guidance through the problem solving. So just real quick, just to recap, the 5 steps of emotion coaching: awareness, connection, empathy, guidance, and problem solving. So those are the kinds of things that we're wanting to especially engage in if we're trying to help build emotional intelligence and emotional resilience in our kiddos. So there are a few strategies for emotional coaching that I really liked. He gets into, I think there's like 12 or 13 of them. I won't get into all of them here. I'll just hit a few of the highlights, but I really like this idea of using scaffolding and praise. This goes into the problem solving element and sort of figuring out where to go. Now that we've got a grasp on the emotions that we're feeling, now what do we do? The scaffolding is this idea of sort of building. Okay, you got really angry with your brother because he wouldn't let you pick the show that you want. And you said all of those things that you don't really mean, and you threw the remote across the room and it broke. And you just kind of go through all of these things that happen. Okay, in order to make this right, I think you're probably going to need to apologize to your brother. What do you think about that? Okay, how do you want to apologize to your brother? What do you want to say? All right, why don't you go ahead and go say that? And then after they do step 1, you go, hey, fantastic, way to go. I'm really proud of you. I bet you that was hard, but I bet you also feel a lot better now that you've done that. This is scaffolding. Okay, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's step 4. And we're just sort of building. It doesn't necessarily have to be tangible things, but we're going to establish sort of this strong base of how to get ourselves into this state of emotional regulation. And each time they do one of those steps, we really praise. Man, I bet that was really hard, and I bet you feel really good. You ought to be really proud of yourself for doing that. That took a lot of maturity. Saying things like that goes a really long way, especially when it's sincere, when we're being honest, when we are being empathetic, when we really respect and care for our kids, and we're not doing this just to be I don't know, just to be sarcastic or in a what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't know. I lost the word. Anyway, must not be important. But this is one of the strategies: use scaffolding and praise. And honestly, the praise thing, it works across the board, no matter the age. Our teenagers like it when we tell them, "Hey, I'm really proud of you for doing that." That shows a lot of maturity. I said that to our 12, almost 13-year-old this morning. In fact, I told him he had done some stuff that was sort of out of his normal mode of operating. It was really mature. It was really insightful for him. And I told him, "Hey, bud, I noticed that you did that, and I thought that was really great. I'm really proud of you." And he didn't give a big response or reaction because he's like in that tween age stage. So he's of course not going to give me the satisfaction of like, "Oh, wow, thanks. I really appreciate that." But he just sort of nodded his head and said, "Thank you," which I'll take. On the other end of that, though, our 1-year-old granddaughter, whenever she's over, when she puts the toy into the right box, our whole family will gather around, because that's what we do when she's over. We just all gather around and watch her. Our whole family will gather around and we'll watch her, and she'll put the right toy in the right box, and she'll look at us, and we'll all go, "Yeah." And she's gotten to where whenever she does anything that she thinks she should get applause for, she'll do it, and then she'll look around just clapping, like, "Where's my audience?" She wants praise. Kids thrive on this stuff, as they should. They really want our approval, and they really want our affirmation. Even if you have a kiddo who doesn't particularly demonstrate that, they really do. They they um, they grow so much. They feel so much more connected with us when they hear us praise them. So, okay, I spent a lot of time on this. I didn't intend to, but scaffolding and praise goes a long, long way. Set aside your parental agenda. This was another one that I was like, I don't know, John Gottman. But then by the end of the little section on this, I was like, yeah, all right, John Gottman's right. Set aside your parental agenda. This is your parental agenda is exactly what it sounds like. There are some things that we just want to instill in our kids. We want our kids to be good at this. We want our kids to have this skill. We want our kids to have this value. There are just certain things that we want instilled into our children. And sometimes we are so focused on getting that into them that we lose sight of where they actually are in their path to get there. what I mean by this is I'll just use the example of myself. When I was in 7th grade in the early 90s, I was diagnosed with ADD. I went to a therapist, and my parents were like, something's just off. School's really hard. I was starting middle school, and grades just weren't good. And so my dad was like, I really think something's wrong. So I went to see a therapist, and they diagnosed me with ADD. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, you gave kids medication that wasn't super refined. And so most kids with ADD were just walking around like zombies. And my dad saw that. He heard that they were putting me on, I think it was Ritalin. It was either Ritalin or Adderall. I don't remember which one. I think it was Ritalin. And there was all this negative press about Ritalin and just putting kids on Ritalin all the time. And so he was like, no, we're not going to do that. And so we just didn't do anything. And I continued my middle school, high school, and collegiate academic careers without any sort of assistance for the ADD with which I'd been diagnosed. Now, my dad was also very big on everybody going to college, my sister and I both, because he went and took one semester of college, dropped out, moved back home, married my mom, started a family. And his entire adult life, he regretted that, because I don't think regretted the marrying my mom and having the family, but he regretted not getting his college degree because he was constantly struggling and constantly stressed about losing his job. And so he wanted us to especially make sure that we went to college. Now, his desire to see me succeed academically sort of blinded his recognition that I needed help to succeed academically. So his parental agenda was be good at school, be successful, go to college. When what he probably should have been able to recognize was, okay, you're going to need a little bit of help with that. But me being on ADD medication did not align with his parental agenda. And it would have been helpful. At 41, at the age of 41, I went ahead and went back and got a diagnosis of adult ADHD. I take medication for it now. In fact, it's time for me to take my medication right now. But it completely changed how I interact with and engage with any sort of academic work. And so we really need to be willing to set aside our parental agenda, recognize what is actually happening in the moment, in reality with our child, and address that. And if along the way we can sort of realign that with our parental agenda, great. But we ought not be so blind to what's happening with our kids that we refuse to let go of this parental agenda. So when necessary, set that aside and see what's actually happening with your kiddo and address that instead. Avoid siding with the enemy when there's conflict, when there are issues, when there's something going on. Even if you agree with the enemy, your kid comes home and says, I'm failing, or you get a phone call from the teacher, your child is failing algebra. The kid comes home, well, my algebra teacher doesn't teach right, or my algebra teacher this, my algebra teacher that. If you're like us, you're siding with the algebra teacher. You're like, I'm 100% sure that your algebra teacher is telling the truth and that you are not doing well in the class. However, what your child needs to hear from you is, I bet this is overwhelming. I bet because you're failing, I bet you feel a little bit powerless. I know that whenever I'm not very good at something, sometimes I struggle to ask for help. Is that how you're feeling right now? And if you can get in touch with the emotion that is underlying what's actually happening, some really good, strong things can come from that. Because if all we do is come in and say, your teacher said this, your coach said this, your friend's mom called and she said that you did this, when they get the sense that we're siding with the enemy, even if the enemy's right, and a lot of times the enemy's right, but even if the enemy's right, if they get the sense that we are siding with the enemy, what they're going to hear is we're being dismissive of their emotional state. We're disapproving of what's happening, and we're being a little bit laissez-faire with what to do about it. And what we need to do is tap into that emotional coach side. We need to go, okay, what do we need to do? How are you feeling about this whole thing right now? Let's address that, and then let's talk about how to move forward. All right, don't instantly impose your solutions. Help your child problem solve. Man, this can be a hard one, especially if you're like a type A, really fast, really efficient parent, and you can see, okay, if you'll just do step 1, 2, and 3, then your problem will be solved, and we can all move on with our life. But what we need to do is we need to empower our kids to be their own problem solvers. And sometimes that requires sitting with them, offering a little bit of guidance, We talked about this in one of the last videos about reality testing, what our kiddos are saying, what their solutions are. Because the more we can help them problem solve, the more confidence they're going to have in themselves, the more they're going to trust that even though I have this emotion, even though I'm scared, even though I'm nervous, even though I'm feeling a little bit anxious or have some trepidation about this thing, I trust my problem solving abilities because I've been put in this position before. And that's ultimately what we want. So when we sweep in and we go, okay, just do this, we sort of take away that experience of them learning how to solve their own problems. And in doing so, we take away their opportunity to learn how to override the emotions that often accompany an inability to problem solve. So don't instantly impose your own solutions. Be honest. This one's hard too, especially if you are not super proud of what your kid is doing, if you are just really convinced that your parental agenda is important, if you do side with the enemy, if you have all the right answers, sometimes being honest can be difficult. But if we start from a place, though, where we respect our child, we start from there, we have some empathy and we understand the situation through their eyes, and we sincerely want to help them reach a plausible solution for what's going on, then we can be honest without any fear, because those are the things that we want. We want our child to feel respected, we want our child to feel seen, and we want our child to reach a good solution. So if we really want those things, then we're a lot more free to be honest. And then finally, build up your base of power through emotional connection, not authoritarian intimidation. I really liked this phrase, base of power, that John Gottman uses, that we all have a base of power as parents. Sometimes it's just the fact that we are the authority. In the foster care world, we are the authority because the state in which we live says we're your authority. So you kind of have to do whatever we say. Now you can take that approach where you're authoritarian, I'm your parent, and so you have to do what I say. You can take that approach, but really, if you want a true base of power, if you want true influence over your child, if you want them to really open up and listen to what you have to say, that comes through emotional connection, understanding them on an emotional level. I recognize, I'm aware of the emotions that you feel. I'm going to work to establish a connection. You're going to know that I'm empathetic. I'll offer you a little bit of guidance, and I'm going to help you problem solve. Whenever our kids know that we're willing to go through those 5 steps of emotional coaching, man, our base of power goes way, way, way up, and it strengthens a lot because we have an emotional connection with them. We're not just constantly out intellectualizing them. And so if you really want that base of power, if you really want that influence, I think is a better word, then get there through emotional connection rather than authoritarian intimidation. All right, this is the last thing that we're going to do, and then we're done. We've got about 10 minutes left, if that. But I want to get into some ages and stages. And so this is broken down into age groups: 1 through 3, 4 through 7, 8 through 12, and then adolescence. You might notice that in a lot of our videos and a lot of our teaching, especially if you come to our classes, you already know this about us. We're sort of up to our neck in teenagers in our house. So our youngest is 10, our oldest is 20. So we've got teenagers just everywhere. So that's where a lot of our focus in life is right now. So a lot of times you'll hear us say some things that are sort of more like older kids specific. And a lot of you tend to not have teenagers in your home because, especially in the foster care world, most of the kiddos who come into care are in that like 1 to 3, 4 to 7, maybe 8 to 12 range. And so I want to make sure that I don't go through this entire thing without talking about those specific age groups. But in the 1 to 3, and John got at the end of his book, Gottman lays out a lot of these. He goes through, he even goes like 0 to 1 in the newborn phase, what we could be doing to help with emotion and emotion regulation. So I'm going to start with the 1 to 3 age group, though. And in that range, we're just learning emotions. We're learning what they are. So a child feels mad for the first time. A child feels scared for the first time. A child feels confused for the first time. So they're just sort of experiencing some of these emotions for the very first time. So a lot of times what we want to do in the 1 to 3 phase is give some controlled choices. Now, obviously, this is going to seriously depend on where the child is developmentally, because not every child will even have the ability to verbalize what they want in this phase. But assuming that they do, assuming that language is starting to come on board, assuming that they're starting to be able to like point at what they want, give some controlled choices. So It's cold outside. Do you want your blue coat or do you want your red coat? Which coat do you want? Label general emotions. Oh, you look mad at daddy. Are you mad? Say mad. Say, I'm mad. I'm mad. That's right. You're mad. And then give some solutions. Okay, we're mad. Do we want to sit down? Do we want to go outside? Do we want to play baseball? What do we want to do now that we're mad? Give some solutions, and then praise positive behavior. Whenever you see them doing the right thing, really praise. Like we talked about earlier, this goes a long, long way. There was one other thing that I was going to say about this that slips my mind now, but this is the phase in which we really have to give some space for them to learn. I know that this can be such a difficult phase that it's the terrible twos, but really our experience has been that it's like the terrible 18-month-olds. But then once they get out of that, like once they hit like 2.5, typically things kind of level out. But man, that 18 months old, they're really wanting some autonomy. They want to do everything themselves. That's actually a good thing. And so we need to empower them, we need to help them, but we need to do it in this controlled environment. All right. For ages 4 through 7, this is where we're learning to regulate emotions. Peer interactions start to matter. All of a sudden, I'm going to preschool or I'm going to kindergarten, and I realize that whenever I take the toy from the friend cries, and that makes me feel bad. I don't want to make the friend cry. And so start to learn from our peers how to regulate our emotions. And so peer interactions are really, really important. John Gottman recommends a lot of, especially one-on-one play during this period. So if you have play groups or play dates, a lot of time I realize a lot of times kids are in school at this age, but one-on-one time is really important here because they're learning to belong and learning to include. And so sometimes it can be really difficult if I'm a 4 or 5-year-old kid and I'm playing with another 4 or 5-year-old kid, and the third 4 or 5-year-old kid walks up. Sometimes it's difficult for me to even know how to include the third kid. And so now the third kid's getting left out because I just haven't developed that skill yet. So sometimes in this phase, it's really important to have a lot of one-on-one interaction before expanding out to larger group interactions. Obviously, that doesn't mean never put your kid in a group setting, but understand it's going to take some time for them to learn how to participate in a group. And so giving them some space to do that will be good. Express imagination and creativity. Be the driver of their rocket ship. Engage in this with them. Engage in pretend play and role play with them, because that draws out not just the childhood, not just the imagination and just the creativity, but it can also help uncover a lot of what they're actually thinking. Pretend play uncovers fears, especially. Man, that 4 to 7 age range, that's where a lot of fear starts coming out. You sit down in a school and you have a fire drill and you learn, oh, the entire building that I'm sitting inside could catch on fire. Hadn't really been on your radar up to that point. I remember in West Texas, where I grew up, we had tornado drills all the time. Get under your desk, or like line up along the wall away from the windows. We'd have tornado drills. Oh, our building could get destroyed by weather, by something coming out of the sky and destroying the building. Active shooter drills are a thing now in the world in which our children are growing up. They're learning that someone could walk into their school with a gun and kill them. And so fear starts to become a real thing. And a lot of times those can be expressed through pretend play. It can uncover a lot of fear and open up a lot of opportunities for you to talk with your kids about what they fear, especially. So 1 through 3 is starting to learn the emotions. 4 to 7 is starting to regulate the emotions. Emotions kind of start to decline in that 8 to 12 range, and again in adolescence. But it's sort of this intellectual awakening, which you might laugh at. You might be like, I have an 8-year-old and they're not really that intellectual. I get it. But this is where an awareness of social status starts to become a thing. In my school growing up, if you were fast, you were popular. So Ryan George was the fastest kid in our school, and therefore by far the most popular. And it's also funny because there's a hierarchy of like popularity and who's cool, who's not. And there's no rules, there's no guidelines or terms for establishing this, but everybody knows it. Everybody knows who is more and less popular than you. And so this all starts in that 8 to 12 range. So emotions then become a social liability. For me to display some kind of emotion. If I'm a boy and I start crying out on the playground, this is now an emotional liability at this phase because now I'm a baby. Now I'm a crybaby, and that's bad. If I'm a girl and I go hug someone who is outside of our friend group and that girl's supposed to be gross or that girl's supposed to be an outcast, well, now I'm gross. Now I'm an outcast because I went and hugged this other person. So emotions become a social liability. And therefore, a lot of emotional inconsistencies start to come into play because this is the phase where kids really start to adopt the value systems of their peer groups rather than the value systems of their parents. So up to this point, whatever is important, whatever matters to mom and dad, that's what's important, that's what matters to me. But around this phase, that's where they start going, but my friends kind of like this more, so I'm going to be that way. But the kid is still living according to how mom and dad have raised them. And so there's going to start to be a lot of emotional and intellectual inconsistencies. They can be kind of stereotypical type things like somebody might their peer group really takes a strong stand against wearing clothing that's made in certain regions of the world, and yet their entire closet is full of those clothes. And so there can be a lot of inconsistencies like that, especially during this range. And that's very typical, especially criticism of adult conventions. So if it's the way that adults do it, then they don't like it, and it's going to just be inherently wrong and fundamentally flawed. So that's the intellectual awakening is the emotions sort of take a back seat, and this rise of the intellect starts to take over. And so we just need to give our kids space for that. And sometimes we can challenge them. We can do some reality testing with them. Do you really feel that way? Um, and we can help guide them through that. But we also need to give them space because this is a really developmentally appropriate thing. All right, and finally, adolescence. Adolescents are all about the individualized emotions. This is just me. This is how I am. Boy, we hear that a lot in our house. And so adolescence is a journey of self-exploration, figuring out who they are, figuring out what kinds of things that they're into. And we sort of got into this in the conflict between parents and tweens and teens in one of our last videos. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. You're welcome to go back and watch that video if you have more questions about this. But I do want to be sure and mention these things, though, that this is a journey of self-exploration, especially when it comes to emotions. So there's going to be a lot of emotional, especially with the onset of hormones and all the things that does to both male and female bodies, and all the ways that can kind of start to really jack with and distort our emotional I don't know, our ability to be emotionally regulated. They really want that separation from parents. I don't want to be linked to mom and dad anymore. I don't want you to do anything for me. I don't want you to. There's a great quote in the book. I can't remember who he was quoting, but it was something along the lines of, at some point during adolescence, you discover that your child has fired you as the manager of their life, and you have to fight like a dog to get rehired as a consultant. And I really like that terminology, really like that phrase. You have to fight like a dog to get rehired as a consultant because you're not the manager anymore. They want to manage their own life. Although they do need you to please make breakfast and drive them to their friend's house. Okay. Sorry, we're not supposed to tease or humiliate, as the next one says. But that's just a truth to raising teenagers. They want separation. They don't want you to manage their life anymore, but they're still going to need you for a lot of stuff. We've got to give a lot of space for that. Avoid teasing and humiliating, especially publicly, but privately as well. Whenever you're having a conversation, especially if you're in some conflict, avoid sarcasm, avoid throwing things back in their face, avoid calling out all of their inconsistencies. Avoid that because it's not getting anywhere. Understand them on an emotional level. Hey, I get it. I get that you are wanting some separation from us. How can we help you do this successfully? Because sometimes whenever we give you a lot of separation, whenever we give you a lot of autonomy over yourself, it doesn't always go so well. So how can we help you do it in a way that goes well? Because we want to encourage independence. That's where they're going anyway. We want to help them establish some independence in a healthy and productive way, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We don't want our teenagers growing up into 20-something-year-olds, growing up into 30-something-year-olds. Obviously, there are people who need to stay at home because of developmental or disability issues. However, if your child is a typically developed child, what we want is to encourage independence. And so if they're fighting for it, help them get it, because that's what we're after anyway. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's all for Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child by John Gottman. That's not going to show up. But that's it for our discussion here today. Quiz time. Again, put this website into your browser, 366gathering.com/EQ-quiz. 366gathering.com/EQ-quiz. Take that quiz. As soon as you hit submit, you'll get a link to the evaluation. Fill out that evaluation and we'll send you your CEU. And we'll see you on the next video.